Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Linder. I'm 5G evangelist and head of 5G marketing for Ericsson here in North America. I'm the one standing between you and lunch, and I hope that you will be worthwhile to take the lunch a little bit later today, because I'm going to try to give you a primer here on what's going on in the 5G world, both when it comes to consumers, when it comes to businesses and society at large, for the difference that we expect it can make. So we have 45 minutes ahead of us. I plan to have leave some time for question and answers at the back end, but feel free to also put questions in the chat box on the side here. So I'll pick from those questions as we get along. So don't feel the need for holding off the questions. Next slide, please. So the topic we're going to talk about here is the impact of 5G. So essentially trying to get you a good feeling for what we think, not so much about what the technology does, but the impact we expect it to have. So if we move to the next slide, please. I'm going to cover 4 subjects for you here. The first, some of the fundamentals around 5G, what we have built it up around. Second, Ericsson Mobility Report, some snapshots on that one, which are specific for the US market and why they matters. And the last bit, a little bit, something called a practitioner's guide to 5G for business, something that we created this year to actually give all businesses an idea of, if you would ask people to tell you what summer school for 5G to get ready for the fall here, packaged up those ideas. Next slide, please. So if you look at it, I don't know how much you know about Ericsson. I guess we celebrate the Ericsson Day, 9th of October every year, but it was for Leif Ericsson, the Viking, not ourselves. We've been in North America for 100 plus years and 40 years doing mobile technology. Few things that stands out. Here's a number of different fields here, but we're a pretty sizable company in North America with 7,000 employees in the US. Built up a large number of training centers recently, and also invested $100 million in one of the most advanced factories in the US for anyone reshoring production. I'll come back to that later. The next bit, next slide, please. So this slide describes some of the key initiatives that we've been taking this year, over the last 3 years, to advance 5G in the US specifically. The first one is our D15 lab. That is an ecosystem collaboration that's about extending the ecosystem outside of mobile telecoms into adjacent industry. The second one is the ASIC Design Center. For the first time in 15 years, we opened a new design center, and that is for ASICs required in advanced radio solutions. And that one is based in Austin, and then we established AI activities around it. The third one is the smart manufacturing plant, and this is to bring back manufacturing of 5G radios to North America. Over this last 2 decades, 3G and 4G has all been produced abroad. And the last bit is about accelerating the deployment capabilities. So 5G is going to be very service intensive, and we've decided to ramp up those kind of activities so we don't have to hold back the deployment of the large number of small cells that we envision. Next slide, please. So if you look at 5G, it's very easy to get to the conclusion here. It's like 4G and a little bit faster. And that's a little bit how we have viewed all the previous technologies. I would like to encourage you to, when you look at 5G, as something that takes a significant leap forward in the way that all previous generations have done. We don't always know in advance exactly what the leap's going to look like, but when we look back, we can say, yeah, that technology had a big impact. So the difference with 5G and the previous generation is that instead of only focusing on consumers, we focus on consumers and business applications. The second one is 5G is not only a mobile solution, we also use it for fixed broadband applications, essentially where there is no fiber in the ground. So it's expanding the reach of that. And the third piece is that previous generations had predominantly been used for public networks that anyone can access. Now we're using 5G for both public and private networks. So I would argue that it's a significantly broader application space for 5G than anything that we've seen in the past. Next slide, please. So we talk a lot about 5G, about a number of different things. It's faster, low latency, and some of these things are quite hard to understand, but I'm trying to give you a perspective here on what matters and why. If you look to the left here, speed in the network, or how fast we can send data both to you and from you, going to be important. And in the case of 5G, we're actually seeing it a 10x or 20x increase, or 20 to 50x increase, depending on if we're talking to you or from you. So speed is going to continue to be the king, and most things that people are going to do with a smartphone when they get it in their hands, a 5G phone is like, hey, so how fast is it? But it's just a component of what we can do. The second one, which is the queen in this particular perspective, is the latency. Latency actually means like how long it takes from your phone to essentially reach the cloud and getting back. Today you can test that by speaking to your Madam A. If I tell a name here, she will start talking in the background. But you see there's quite a significant lag between when you say something and when you get the response back. With 5G, we're reducing that one to single-digit milliseconds. So it's a 10x reduction, roughly, we're talking about there. And that allows for a whole range of new applications. The third element here is very much about the cornerstones of 5G, the rooks, where security, availability, and reliability, what you think is the DNA and the reason why you trust the mobile network in the first place, they're going to continue to be in place and perhaps a little bit more accentuated. When it comes to mobility, this is not that you can move around while you walk or bike, so, but this is essentially defining how fast you can support any vehicle moving. So we're bumping that up to 310 miles an hour or 500 kilometers an hour. That doesn't mean that we're going to drive that fast in a car, but it will be relevant for rapid trains, it will be relevant for drones, or even for planes approaching an airport. The last two bits here, position accuracy is important. Today you're depending on a satellite above you to see exactly where you are, or triangulation with the Wi-Fi network. With 5G, we can from the network see exactly where you are in 3 dimensions, which allow us to track things, even things that are moving, and helping them navigating, which will be a game changer. And the last bit, with all of these things that we introduce, we expect there's going to be significantly more amount of different devices, and device density, how many devices we can support in a given geographical area, is increased by a factor 10. So the game with 5G is pretty much understanding how do you combine these different things. A little bit when you're composing a menu at home, you don't have just steak. You have steak and potatoes and sauce, and that becomes a dish. So these are the building blocks that you create the wonderful 5G dishes with for a specific purpose. Next slide, please. When we look at this, it's easiest to approach 5G and trying to understand what are the use cases or what are the categories of use cases. And we see 6 broad categories, 2 that are shaped around what you and I know as broadband today. So this is about mobile broadband, enhancing that. It's about fixed wireless access, which is the way of using 5G for fixed broadband applications. On top of that, we have a number of different IoT segments, which I will come back to. Next slide, please. So if you drill into the broadband evolution and the segments here, the mobile broadband is very much about 3 things. It's about delivering video with higher resolutions, both up and down, so you get a richer video experience to your device. The second is about enabling more games on mobile devices, so you don't have to have a desktop PC or a game console to play games. You can play them on a mobile device, and the mobile device don't have to be wired to a computer, because the computing power is sitting at the other end of the mobile network and can easily reach the mobile devices. The third piece is about getting rid of the wires to augmented reality and virtual reality glasses that today are connected to a PC or something like that, but getting rid of that, and in the same way as the gaming application, talking to computer capabilities at the edge of the network instead. So there's a number of different evolutions paths here where we as a consumer, we will most likely notice this, oh, this is a different experience than anything I've experienced in the past. On the fixed wireless side, it's very much about solving 3 problems that are not well solved today. The first one is in urban areas, closing the digital divide that we see in cities by providing wireless access, the last bit, to those households that are not yet connected by fiber. The second is when we move out in the countryside, making the countryside clever and connecting rural homes where you're perhaps connecting them to 5G, both for the fixed and the mobile broadband. So one infrastructure for two services. And the third element is using 5G indoors to replacing wires and so on. We're starting to see this is starting to play out. This is a foundation. So what you're going to see initially here is going to be fixed wireless access and mobile broadband that drives the deployment. And where the demand for these services are, that will determine where networks will be built along the road here. Next slide, please. As we move up into the Internet of Things category, we have a number of different things going on here. When we started defining 5G, we talked about the blue piece here, massive IoT. So very large quantities of very small devices that generate little traffic and little revenues. The second thing we talked a lot about was critical IoT, or ultra reliable, low latency communication, if you want a tongue twister. That one is very much about leveraging raw performance with very low latency and very high reliability for applications that haven't seen daylights yet. These were the two things we talked about earlier. Right now we're seeing massive IoT has got a sibling, it's called broadband IoT, which is essentially using the same technology that exists in a smartphone today, put it in a device for medium traffic, medium revenue potential. Think about your smartwatch or anything of that nature. And on the purple side, industry automation IoT, we see that we're moving into a landscape here with a lot more automation, anything driving Industry 4.0, where you can get rid of wires in industry applications and start to become more flexible, both production and warehouse environments. So these are the different things that are coming on top, with the blue and green happening first. Those ones are in volume deployment right now. And the orange and the purple, that's what we have standardized and developed networks for, that's being rolled out from now and onwards. So with these 6 different continents, the 2 previous one and these 4, you have a really good view of what type of applications will 5G enable. Next slide, please. So we can go to the next one. So there's a few numbers I wanted to show and point out to you. So if we look about the penetration of smartphones or mobile subscriptions when it comes to 5G, we're going to be around 11, 12 perhaps at the end of this year. Steep ramp up next year to 48, and the year after that to 118. So it's a very aggressive ramp here in the beginning, with smartphone as a dominating device, and then expecting a 31% penetration in just two years. And if we compare this with 4G, things happening faster and happening earlier in the cycle and reach higher than anything we saw in the 4G era. As a comparison, you can say that when the iPhone was introduced for 4G, it was 33 months after the first network, and it came one phone. It took 3 years before there were 4 types out. This year, they came after 22 months after the network was introduced, and 4 phones, including the most advanced capabilities, straight out of the gate. Next slide, please. The other thing that's happening is the fixed wireless element here. Fixed wireless is interesting because, like, fixed broadband subscribers generate roughly 100 times the traffic of a mobile broadband subscribers. So when you start, it's enough to add, so 2 million fixed wireless subscribers generate the same type of traffic as 200 million mobile broadband subscribers. So when you start mixing these ones, you better know what you're doing. What we're seeing here is very strong momentum for this. Fixed wireless on the worldwide basis going from 60 to 160 million by 2025. And at the end of this planning cycle here, we expect 25% of the fixed wireless traffic to be 25% of the total mobile traffic. So even though 160 million is significantly less than all 5G subscribers that we will have by that point in time. Interesting to look at, because we see that a rapidly growing momentum for this. And the pandemic has showed here, when you take, in our case, you move 2,500 people out of one building and deploy them in their homes. We have a totally different challenge to deal with, where fixed wireless can connect some of those employees that didn't have appropriate broadband connections. And they can also serve the same problem, and solution is actually what we use for small businesses and so on. Next slide, please. Cellular IoT is an interesting segment, because you look at this one, so you have 3 different things going on here. You have a legacy IoT segment, which is essentially the 2G and 3G applications, which are peaking in 2019, 2020, and then gradually going down. You have the light purple in the middle here, which is narrowband massive IoT, or narrowband IoT and Cat-M in geek terms. This is essentially all the small stuff. But this one is growing extremely rapidly and essentially leveraging the 4G capabilities in the network. And the last bit on top of here is the broadband IoT and critical IoT. That's where we see the other significant growth segment, but second in terms of raw numbers compared to massive IoT, but the significant impact, especially if we look at the back end of the period. And if you look at it here, 5.2 billion, 25 billion connections in total, 2025, if we look at all different technology, and then you flip the numbers, so it's 5.2 if we look for cellular connections by 2025. Next slide, please. So here, I'm going to talk you into a little bit about the practitioner's guide, some of the things that we've seen when being out talking to this. And just to give you a feeling for these conversations have started 5-6 years ago, when we saw a lot of companies coming to us and asking, say, hey, we think you might have a new G coming up. What is that about and how can we leverage it? So we saw a strong interest from outside of the mobile industry and consumers from the very beginning. So a lot of those conversations have now materialized and we see the first things being deployed. So I'll take you through some of the learning and some of the aspects that we've seen when taking through this. So you can flip 2 slides. The first conversation that we have talked a lot about is essentially how 5G is contributing to shrinking the business world and making the world smaller. There's a number of different things that we see. First, that all previous generations have been shrinking the world in different ways. To the point right now, you and I can order pretty much anything we want just by 2 clicks on our phone. Second here, that with 5G and easy access to a lot of sensors, we can gather data from those sensors, bring that back, starting to make sense out of it and present insights pretty much instantly. So gone are the days when you collect data and then process it forever, come out with an insight 6 months later. We will know what's going on with our customers pretty much real time. Second, by moving the clouds closer and closer to subscribers, out to what we refer to as the edge, you will get quicker responses. And you can start using applications that are dependent on real-time responses that hasn't been possible to date. You can also get real-time supply chains. When everybody is buying and expecting 2 clicks to be sufficient to buy, that propagates all the way back through the supply chain. And 5G can connect both what's gone in the warehouses and manufacturing plants, but also inbound and outbound logistics, tie that pretty much to the pull coming from the buying end. My daughter always laughs at me when I say, hey, let's look at the manual whenever we should do something. And she said, well, why don't we just look at YouTube? And the next step after that is what you put on your augmented reality glasses and look at the frying pan and say, hey, let's make Swedish meatballs, recipe please. And you start and get instruction for that cooking exercise or anything else you want to learn as you do it, not something that you have to learn in advance and then apply it, but because you get the application and the learning moment sort of melting together. One of the very first application we do in our factory right now that we build it up that we use 5G for is knowledge transfer. So the people with AR glasses talk to people at the factory at a different part of the world. And the more experienced people can see what's going on and giving them ideas and assistance in real time. And the last bit here is very much that we take out wires to devices. Any type of device that would make it easier and make it more flexible and usable. Move to the next slide, please. There's a lot of discussions right now. Why is everybody so eager? Isn't there fantastic 5G hype? And why is everybody so eager to get out first? And when we did a study 2 years ago, 73% business said that the absolutely most strategic objective was to get out early and get first mover advantages. And you can see that on a number of different fronts here. The number of live 5G networks at the back end of 2019 was 59. So in year 1 of 5G, we built 59 different networks in the world. That same number for 4G was 4. We had 17.7 million 5G subscribers just in the first year, and have been ramping phenomenally this year, especially if we take into see what's going on in China. That same thing, but with the subscribers that we brought on board in the first four quarters last year, that took 10 quarters for 4G. The third thing I would like to point out is a little bit what's going on in the device ecosystem. When I wrote this slide less than a month ago, it was 190 devices, different devices that were released. Now it's 222, and out of 444 announced. If you dig into these things and see a little bit what's going on there, it's a lot of variety of devices, 20 different form factors or types. Half of them are mobile phones, a lot of them are fixed wireless terminals that we do for fixed wireless, but the remaining 18 categories is very much about exciting devices where 5G is deployed, and we have access to those devices very early on. And the final piece here, that for the build out and the growth of 4G, we saw that on the operator side, the ones that went early out and captured the early adopters first on, they're the winners both from growth and market share positions down the road. So out of the close to 300 service providers that we track, 49 have enjoyed an 8.5% growth over the last decade. The remaining 250 has been flat or negative. So there's a number of different learnings here and the reasons why people are trying to gain first mover advantages. Next slide, please. 5G is a very learning intensive journey. Don't see it as something where you can approach it and wait for the elevator and then take the elevator up, push 5 and you get there. It's a stairway to 5G. It's a journey that takes place in steps. We're moving from a world where most of the services were over the top and the network had universal coverage everywhere pretty much where the sunlight reaches. It's more stepwise build for the network build. It's a more collaborative co-creation phase when it comes to use cases. We build showcases to show off at an event, and then gradually we have to implement it and add them, building the business case around them and tuning them so it actually become useful cases down the road. And some of the use cases we're talking about are very complex, both from an ecosystem, business model, network capability perspective, and those ones coming later in the process. In the same way that when you go to college, the advanced nuclear physics classes are coming late and easier math classes are coming up front. So this is very much a journey. And if you approach 5G as a journey here, similar to going to college, like 5 years, a number of things we should do, action every quarter, you'll get it right. Don't try to skip year 1 and planning for strong comeback year 2. Didn't work at college, will not work here neither. And don't only focus on the end game here. The hardest part is not figuring out the end game. Everybody agrees on the end game. The hard part is figuring out what you do in the first and second quarters and get going. Next slide, please. 4G is easy to understand because you don't have to understand it. And what I mean by that is 4G is both coverage and capacity is so universal. So it's like sun on the outside, and it even goes through windows and things. So when it's on the outside, it's on the inside too. And you don't really have to think about 4G. 5G has comes in 3 different flavors. One which we call high band, which is very much for shorter distances. If we're talking mobile application, the reach is less than a mile. If we're talking fixed wireless application, the reach can be up to 3 miles. But this is where you see a lot of the creativity that's happening, but we don't build blanket coverage with this technology. You go into very pockets, into zones where you need that kind of capacity. The second one is mid-band. That's similar to the most used spectrums for 4G. This is very much about creating coverage and capacity across the whole metropolitan areas, along interstate highways, and where there's a decent size of population, pretty close to the radio resources being deployed. And the last one is low band. This is where we're starting for nationwide coverage. And this is quite important technology both in the urban areas as well as rural areas. So actually building up a 5G coverage layer. I think that what you see right now with the most advanced phones, they have all these 3 different flavors integrated. So we can actually taking out of the equation, hey, we have to pair phones with a certain type of network. Now we can focus on just applying the best type of spectrum to get the job done in different areas. And if you don't understand anything as spectrum at all, I don't think you're on this conference in the first place. But there's a few things when you and I explain spectrum to other people that don't get it, that we can help them understand. Help them see that anything regarding low band, that's typically which reaches wherever the roads have 1 lane in each direction. When we're talking about mid-band, that's typically where we are in an area where the roads have got 2 lanes in each direction. And the high band is where we see the roads having 3 or 4 lanes in each direction. So you get some kind of feeling where we can expect these different type of technologies. The low band also go through windows and walls without any problem. Mid-band does it to some extent. High band is either inside or outside, and you have to deploy it in both places if you want it to work in both places. Next slide, please. The thing that's changing when you move to 5G is what the ecosystem look like and who you need to talk to in the ecosystem. For 4G was essentially network service or service providers offering the services. There was smartphone providers and there was network providers like Ericsson. Between the 3 of us, we sort of figured out most of the things in the ecosystem. We didn't really have to talk to application providers from our side, for example. That changes quite a bit when we move to 5G. We typically talk with an industry anchor in the manufacturing space or in the automotive space or in the energy utility space that we build and trying to nail the use cases around by really understanding their issues. Typically get in their system integrations and their application integrators early on because the applications have stronger dependencies towards the network. And the system integrators and the service providers are trying to build all of these together. So it's typically these 6 players that are in place. So whenever you're looking at deploying 5G, ask yourself the question, do we have all these different pieces together? Next slide, please. So since the reach of 5G will not be everywhere for all different technologies at the same time, one of the most important questions is asking, say, what are the use places? Not the use cases, what we're going to do with it, but where will we do things and where can we add significant value? And we've started to see that if in the large enterprise sectors, there's been a lot of focus on sports venues, building out 5G to actually support a whole range of the experience for fans and also for the media recordings that's taking place at those venues. The second area is universities. Universities deploying 5G as building up an innovation platform. So small and medium companies can come there, create 5G innovation, test it on the students, thus students being the digital pioneers in terms of users of this, and not even early adopters, but first adopters. And then also playing a role in looking at the overall efficiencies creations at the university. Bringing in 5G in manufacturing plant has very much to do about when we bring reshore manufacturing and bring back manufacturing from overseas to North America. We typically have to do it with a lot higher degree of automation. It has to be a lot greener or environmentally friendly. It has to be a lot meaner in the sense that we're going to produce our absolutely latest and greatest product and doing it with a very high level of flexibility in terms of meeting the demand from the supply chain. So if you build up a new manufacturing plant in the US today, it's going to have 4G and 5G in it for a number of different applications. Then we have hospitals and airports, which we're starting to take off. But you can go through sector by sector and saying, hey, what is a use place here that would benefit from 5G? What do we do there first? And then look at how to scale use cases from that. It's also affecting small and medium businesses, like for restaurants or small stores, for agriculture, for home workers, where you can actually see, hey, we don't have fiber here, and it's unlikely that we get fiber anytime soon. So then 5G can play a role of bridging to these small and medium businesses or individual contributors and providing really good broadband capabilities that even is flexibly and not tied to a physical location, but can be used in a variety of places. Next slide, please. When it comes to wireless, you have, it's easy to start just looking at the numbers and saying, hey, we had 4 and 5 and now 6 is being introduced. Let's go for 6 rather than 4 and 5 because it seems like a higher number. We're seeing these 3 different technologies here, 4G being used for massive and broadband IoT that I talked about in the beginning, 5G being used for enhanced mobile broadband and for critical and industry automation IoT, and Wi-Fi 6 to upgrading for the capabilities where there was Wi-Fi 5 before, where you typically the contract or service life for that service has run out. And the question is not so much, okay, do we pick one here, but do you pick 2? In case you pick 2, which 2 do you pick? Or can you afford to have all 3 deployed, depending on applications and so on? Next slide, please. When it comes to 5G, I mentioned in the very beginning, we're talking about both public and private applications. And we're looking at a private network with 5G or private cellular networks, anyone, either if it's 4G or 5G. It's not so clean cut. Is it fully private or fully public? You can look at it from, hey, what are the spectrum we're using here? Licensed spectrum or unlicensed? Who owns the network assets? Does the business own them, or is that something owned by by a service provider? And regarding network operations, is this done by the business themselves, a cellular service provider, or an IT service provider? So around these 3 different building blocks, we're going to form the new business models here for anything we call private networks or hybrids between public and private networks. And then on top of this, we have the capabilities to, in the 5G networks, actually carve out different slices of the network for a specific purpose with unique characteristics for that slice. So this is a very dynamic field in terms of the business model development in this area. The next slide, please. When you approach this, it's very easy to be like, say, hey, we're talking about so many use cases here, but I don't really know which ones will happen first. Which ones should I really focus on? Do I need all to make the business case close? What I've seen working well in those kind of situations is we're trying to understand what are the 3 most important ones. Trying to think yourselves to the late 30s when McDonald's opened the first restaurant. They concluded, hey, we're going to do burgers here. We're burger restaurants. We need to do burgers really, really good. We don't want to have people to leave thirsty, so we add the milkshake. And we want them don't want to be hungry neither and feel that they've got a good deal, so we throw in French fries. When you look at use cases for a specific place, trying to start defining what those 3 things are for each and every place, because then you can scale in 2 dimensions after that. A, continue to similar places of exactly the same nature. So when you got the burger restaurant concept going, you can open new restaurants pretty much anywhere. The second thing is about, by focus on the 3, you're not saying no to all other use case innovations, but they can come at a later stage. And if you think about the coffee, the apple pie, or the sundae, or anything, and the nuggets, all of those were things that came out of conversations between the hamburger restaurant and their customers. The same thing is most likely going to happen here when we look at the evolution of the use cases. So trying to break it into these 2, a nailing phase where you figure out the 3 primary use cases, and then scaling in 2 dimensions after that. Next slide, please. So I've talked you through a journey here with 9 different steps here, and these are all things that you can talk about and doing today, whether it's for applying government policies, whether it's for building networks for a certain business, or applying it for some of the consumer applications. But they're all very relevant topics, and that's been frequently asked over the last 2 or 3 years regarding how do we get going in 5G. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of ways that you can reach me afterwards. I understand that we're putting a lot of things in your hands right now, and some you can use immediately, others will take a longer time. But in this case, anything you want to follow up, these are contacts. Otherwise, we move to the next step here, which I think is the Q&A session. So I have a number of different questions here that's popping up here. The first one is, what do you think the impact of COVID will be on 5G rollout? Delays or actually speed up the rollout, given that it has highlighted key needs and uses? So what we've been seeing so far, in the beginning, we expect, we have to slow down a little bit here. COVID, we don't really know what to do. But the demand has been so strong. So when you're looking for anything related to like individual workers having to work from home, and perhaps even more so children that might have fiber to the school but didn't have broadband at home, there's been a lot of energy going into providing those with any kind of solution available right now. 5G might not have been at the point where there was ready for deployment. So 4G has gone in for a lot of connecting a lot of school children, for example, right now. And 4G is also being very good for connecting people that, hey, living outside of the fiber footprint. So we've seen an acceleration. And I had exactly the same question to my colleagues last week. I discussed with the people that have been deploying 5G in our manufacturing plant and 5G at our corporate campus where there's no people. Well, there are people in the factory, but not a whole lot in the campus. And the message was very clear, like say, hey, the pandemic is not giving us more time. The pandemic is shortening the time and accelerating the digital transformation. So by building these networks right now during the pandemic, we will come out a little bit more running when we start people getting back. And we can apply some of the learnings by building it at the campus, bringing that home to people for a home network solution as well. So I've seen an acceleration of activities, not necessarily a slowdown. And now when you see 48 million smartphones going to come into North American market by the end, we're going to be 48 million by the end of next year. So there's all the power users, early adopters going to come onto the network. So the focus will be there to deliver them a good experience. So the next one is a very good question. So in 10 years, when 5G will be mature, looking at 5G bandwidth demand in terms of area traffic density in a developed country city, what proportion do you expect to come from human users, so smartphones, etc., versus IoT, including cameras, sensors, and all other such new 5G use cases? A rough estimate would be fine. So when we look at this, we have tried to estimate mobile traffic for the last 20 years. We have tried to analyze and see what's really going on and what's driving it. We don't have projections that go as far out as 2030, but it looked at 2025. 76% of the traffic in the mobile network is projected to be video. So and you can say it's video and sensor data in very large quantities, but it's not sensor data that sends the temperature, measurement point, and upwards, but it's sensors that capture video or capture something that later will be processed. So I see it's video in different shapes or form that's going to be drivers. And just to give you a feeling how significant it is, when you move from standard definition TV to HD definition, for what we consume on a phone, is roughly 4x increase in traffic. When we look from standard definition to augmented reality or virtual reality, we're typically talking about 10x. And when you're looking at, it's not only things that's going to be translated down to the users, but we're also going to have a lot of surveillance cameras and security cameras and sending traffic up towards the network. That's perhaps even bigger changes in that area. So it's not so much you and our cameras. When we're at a concert, I'm a Formula 1 geek, so I go to my races, film a little bit, and put that up on Facebook. it's not so much about that in terms of minutes that's going to be the big shift here. There's things that are going to come after that, and things where we film a sequence for an extended period of time, and then move and then analyze that and move it up. And I see a lot of those kind of things is going to take place, where we film a lot. It's going to be analyzed by AI, and we're going to try to turn that into intelligence. We can describe it as video intelligence. Take video, analyze it, drop as much as you can, and then send it inside up. So the amount of traffic we're going to see in the networks will actually depend on where that analysis take place. And what we see right now is that's going to be pushed closer and closer to users. Okay, I think we're hitting the top of the hour here. We got 2 minutes left. I don't see any significant questions on the board here. I would like to thank you all for attending this session, for letting me to stand between you and your lunch. I hope that we've been able to give you some ideas here of what's going on the inside of 5G that you can find relevant, whether you're creating policies where this going, whether you're supporting small community, smart city, or a clever countryside, and deciding how can we make sure that those needs are affected by 5G, or whether you're a consumer or a business wanting to see that, hey, out of all these different things that goes on the spectrum front, what can we leverage soon? Thank you very much from Ericsson, and if you want to reach out to me, I provided my name and contact details before. My name is Peter Linder. Really appreciate it meeting you here today.